welcome to the Soil and Roots podcast, journeying together into deep discipleship. I'm Brian Fisher. This is episode 33. Linda, listen! If you don't understand the episode title, just search for it online and watch the video. It's hilarious. We're continuing with our exploration of spiritual habits, or what some call the spiritual disciplines. Today, we're going to start with some theology and somehow end up in modern-day sales training. We've discovered through our study of the Bible and anthropology that there are 5 key elements necessary to form any one person to become like another person: substantial time, specifically designed habits, intentional and purposeful community, appropriate intimacy, and repetitious and increasingly complex instruction. Time, habits, community, intimacy, and instruction. And now we're exploring the second key element, habits. They're just repeated patterns of our 8 heart view indicators, all the way back in season 2. So how we think, behave, feel, speak, relate, how we treat our health, and time and money in relation to God and others and self and creation. Changing our habits may be as simple as just doing the things Jesus did, but it may not be. Our hearts may be formed solely by changing our habits, but it's not always that easy. Sometimes heart change has to happen first, or sometimes the hearts and habits change together. The human heart is complex, so just trying to will ourselves to change may not be the solution. Sometimes it may make things worse. We're human beings, not human doings. That's why there are 5 key elements of formation and not just one. Last episode, we looked at just one habit, the habit of hearing God. Since we're looking at these key elements in the light of our 4 relationships, today we're going to explore the habit of hearing someone else, other people. Not just their words, but what does it mean to have the habit of listening to someone's heart? Okay, let's start with just a bit of theology to set the stage. Modern Christianity struggles with genuine discipleship, this journey to become more like our teacher. This struggle has been called the Great Omission, and it's having a damaging and debilitating impact on church and culture, at least in this part of the world. We're apprentices of Jesus so that we become more like Jesus, so that we think like he thinks, relate like he relates, desire what he desires, and love like he loves. That our conscious and unconscious ideas are molded into his ideas. For the most part, modern church institutions don't seem to be oriented around this journey of forming our hearts. As we've explored, if our spiritual journey has 6 stages, most modern institutions are only concerned about the first 3. So when we inevitably hit stage 4, this journey inward and the wall, we may find ourselves lonely, disconnected, and without any guide or help. Certain aspects of modern Christianity are very concerned about evangelism, though even that has been reduced in the last century or so. We rarely share the gospel of the kingdom. What we typically hear is a boiled-down version of what's referred to as the gospel of salvation. John Murray wrote a book called Redemption Accomplished and Applied. It's a theological textbook written back in the 1950s. Murray takes a careful look at salvation in the New Testament in its comprehensive form. While you and I tend to assume today that salvation means the moment we choose to follow Jesus, Murray teaches that the New Testament actually presents a much broader, much more comprehensive picture. Salvation is an event, but it's also a journey. Lots of people know Romans 8:28, and we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. As popular as verse 28 is, verse 29 is as equally unpopular. Very few people want to memorize that. Verse 30 is often considered Paul's summary of this journey of salvation. Paul articulates the beginning, middle, and end of the journey. He writes, quote, "And those whom he predestined, he also called. And those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified." Calling, justification, glorification. The beginning, middle, and end of the journey of salvation. Well, those are big words, but when you think about it, we're pretty comfortable with this type of process in lots of other areas of life. Let's say at some point in your life you felt drawn to the field of accounting. You felt called to become a CPA, and so off you went. After passing your exam, your standing changed. You went from being a non-CPA to being recognized as a fully accredited CPA. Having this change in standing made all the difference in the world, but you had a long way to go to become a mature, wise, expert CPA. Through a journey of ups and downs, mistakes and successes, mentorship, life experience, you're eventually inducted into the CPA Hall of Fame. So, calling, you were drawn to a career as a CPA. Justification, you were legally recognized as a CPA. Glorification, at the end of your journey, you became a Hall of Fame CPA. My example isn't all that theologically accurate, but you get the point. Even if we aren't familiar with salvation as a process, as a journey, we're certainly familiar with other processes very similar. So the comprehensive picture of salvation in the New Testament is far more than the moment we accept Jesus, or choose to follow Jesus, or what we commonly think of as being born again or saved. Though we are justified at that moment, our formative journey of salvation has just begun. We were saved, we are being saved, and we will be saved. So what does all this have to do with our habits? Well, our habits are tied to our expectations. We've talked about those before, and we have lots of unconscious ideas of expectation. If modern church institutions aren't prioritizing forming people into being more like Jesus, of taking the comprehensive journey of salvation, we certainly won't have that expectation either. So we won't explore or try habits that would help us to become more like him. If we view salvation as a one-time event with no real meaning or purpose until we're dead, what expectation or motivation would we have to continue the salvation journey right now? Just consider this. If you were to list the most common habits that we should engage in as Christians, what are the ones that come quickly to mind? Well, certainly corporate worship. We show up to church each weekend. Prayer, Bible study, both in groups and by ourselves. Small group maybe, so that we experience some form of community. Well, let's compare that list to just one list of habits that have been practiced for centuries by disciples of Jesus. This is the list that Richard Foster provides in his book, Celebration of Discipline. Meditation, prayer, fasting, study, simplicity, solitude, submission, service, confession, worship, guidance, even celebration. In Dallas Willard's book on spiritual disciplines, he mentions a few more: frugality, chastity, secrecy, sacrifice. There is no comprehensive list of habits because spiritual disciplines can be as creative as the human person. But why don't we hear more about these other habits or spiritual disciplines, this wonderful key element of formation, apart from the very good practices of things like corporate worship and prayer? Well, because so many of us don't expect the Christian life to be one of ongoing intentional formation that requires lots of different habits. Trying, engaging, and practicing habits is ingrained in the heart and mind of anyone who wants to be formed into someone else, whether you want to be a heart surgeon, a CPA, a concert pianist, or just a better husband or wife. Spiritual disciplines work the same way. If we expect to become more like Jesus, we're going to look at his habits and those of his friends, and we might try them. We'll experiment, we'll test, we'll work on this one thing for a while, and then maybe that one thing for a while. Last episode, we looked at the habit of hearing God. That doesn't seem so bad. Most of us wouldn't mind hearing from God on a regular basis. But what about hearing other people? Not just listening to their words, but learning to listen to their hearts. So let's explore the habit of what we'll call heart listening. We develop the discipline of hearing others' hearts so that we might love them and serve them better, so that we may be redeemers, reconcilers, and restorers as we live in the kingdom. Jesus is a master at this. It's just extraordinary. As I read through the Gospels, I'm amazed at how Jesus immediately senses and knows the motivations and conditions and ideas and desires of people's hearts. In Mark 2, Jesus knows the motives of the Pharisees when he heals a man and tells him his sins are forgiven. He listens to their hearts again in chapter 3 when he heals a man on the Sabbath. In Mark 10, Jesus knows the true motivations of the rich young ruler. In chapter 12, the Pharisees try to trick Jesus with a loaded question, but Mark says that Jesus knew their hypocrisy. Jesus knew the motivations in Judas's heart, and he knew that Peter would deny him. Jesus knew the heart of the woman at the well. He knew the heart of the Syrophoenician woman. Now, you may be thinking, well, of course Jesus knows the hearts of people. I mean, he is the second person of the Trinity. He is God. Okay, fair enough. Though don't forget that this side of Pentecost, that very same God lives in you. And we see the same sort of heart listening habit with other normal humans, namely the apostles in the book of Acts. Chapter 3, Peter healed the lame beggar, and the guy didn't even ask for it. Peter discerns the selfish motivations in the hearts of Ananias and Sapphira in Acts 5. In chapter 8, he gets the sense that Simon the magician's heart isn't in the right spot and tells him so in no uncertain terms. In chapter 14, Paul senses a man has enough faith to be healed without speaking to him. People who walk closely with Jesus have an intense curiosity about the condition of the hearts of those around them, and it appears sometimes the Holy Spirit reveals it for truth or healing. Okay, maybe we're not quite comfortable with the idea that modern disciples may spiritually discern the motivations and ideas in the hearts of those around them. Fair enough. Let's look at a more natural discipline of discerning hearts, simply asking the right questions. I started my career in radio. Well, that's not entirely correct. I first started my career as a broke, unsuccessful musician. Then I worked in radio. I worked in various operational roles at a radio station in Pittsburgh and was eventually invited to join the department where the money was made: radio advertising sales. Well, despite the fact that was where the money was to be made, I didn't really like it and didn't make much money. However, I was paid to be trained in a sales system called Sandler Sales. The training ended up being helpful in life and relationships, not just in selling airtime. It's in that training that I came to appreciate the habit of being genuinely curious about people. The program taught that in the sales cycle, it's important to develop a real, appropriately emotional relationship with your prospect. If you were going to make a sale that truly benefited and served a person, you needed to build a relationship centered on trust. That meant that a good prospect allowed the relationship to develop to where they would share their pain, their real under-the-surface need. In fact, the sales program taught that if the prospect showed no interest in developing a trusted relationship, it was time to move on. No trust, no sale. But how did the salesperson invite the relationship into the appropriate level of depth where the prospect would share the underlying emotional reason why they might want to buy radio ads? Well, by asking the question, why? At least 5 times. And by listening, not just to the words, but to the heart. So let's walk through an example. Let's say a radio ad salesperson is meeting with the owner of a dry cleaner, and they meet in the dry cleaner's office. So would you help me understand why you might be interested in buying advertising on our radio station? The dry cleaner responds, well, I like your programming, and I just want to learn more about your station. Okay, that's great. I'm glad you resonate with our programming, but what about our programming interests you? The dry cleaner responds, it's family friendly. We're a family-owned company, and we want to build long-term, trusted relationships with our customers. Some customers come in once a week. We don't just take their money, we talk with them. We get to know about their lives. We know their names, and most of the time they know ours. That's amazing, the salesperson replies sincerely. You're a bit of a different type of dry cleaner from what many people experience. We guess most customers at dry cleaners feel like a transaction, not a relationship, but it sounds like you have a great clientele already, so why might you be interested in investing in radio ads if you've already built such a great customer base? The dry cleaner answers, well, we do have a great customer base, but we don't have enough of them. We've grown primarily through customer referrals, but 2 competitors have opened up within 3 miles of us in the past year, and the economy is down. We just aren't seeing enough people to come through the door to hit our goals. So he responds, I'm sorry to hear that. It does sound like a challenge. Well, besides the competitors and the economy, have you identified any other reasons why your numbers may not be where you want them? Not really, the dry cleaner responds, but I may need to lay off 1 or 2 long-term employees, and gosh, I would just hate that. The salesperson replies, yeah, I can certainly understand that. Besides some potential staff changes, have you identified any other impact on you or your business because of this new competition and the down economy? Sure, the owner responds. I've had to reduce my own income, and I have a daughter I need to send to college in 2 years. Okay, so the salesperson actually asks the question why 5 times in that conversation in a very natural manner. She didn't use the word why every time. I highlighted the key phrases she used in the blog if you want to see how she guided the conversation. She invited the dry cleaner into a relationship. and allowed him to determine whether he shared the core of his concern, whether he chose to trust the salesperson. The conversation started with a surface level answer, they often do. I want to learn more about your product. But the conversation ended with the prospect sharing his true, deeply emotional need. His income was down, and he has a daughter who may not be able to go to college. His pain was that he may not be able to provide for someone he loves dearly, and he may lose some long-term employees, people who depend on him for their livelihoods. Now, what is the salesperson's posture throughout? Legitimately caring and concerned, truly interested in the business and in the owner, and inviting the prospect into a trusted relationship. In other words, she served and listened to the owner, desiring to know his heart. She didn't share about her products, her prices, her features. That would come later if it made sense. Instead, she asked careful questions and invited the dry cleaner into a relationship. In other words, she was practicing heart listening. Salespeople sometimes get a bad rap, and sometimes for good reason. But a mature, selfless salesperson is actually often a fantastic example of a servant, a person with courageous curiosity and a deep desire to listen to the hearts of other people. This is the habit of a disciple, engaging people with the hope of inviting them into deeper, trusted relationships of formation. And 5-element communities like greenhouses practice this habit. So here are just a few bullet points on this habit of heart listening to others. Number 1, what are we listening for? What are we practicing paying attention to? Now, the short answer is heart view indicators. Just as we practice exploring our own hearts, we develop an attunement for picking up on patterns in those around us. Patterns of thought, feelings, behaviors, relationships, and words, as well as their patterns involving their health and time and money. There is a world to explore here. We could do an entire new podcast show on it. It's really fascinating, but I'll give you just one example that I've been practicing for a while myself. I try to listen carefully to what someone doesn't say. I listen for the topics they avoid, for the discussions they leave. Why would I do that? Well, because it helps me listen to their hearts. Like most people, I have several non-confrontational folks in my life, so there are times I might ask them an intentional question or make a comment that's maybe a little bit uncomfortable or on something on which we might politely disagree. Well, why in the world would I do that? Well, was Jesus non-confrontational? He was generally the opposite. In fact, he often invited confrontation. So, if Jesus was comfortable with confrontation and engaged it for the purpose of growing the kingdom and loving people well, and if we're supposed to become more like Jesus, guess what? We should think about becoming people who are increasingly comfortable with appropriate conflict, appropriate confrontation. A non-confrontational person often struggles with their identity. They may be people pleasers, which is generally a sign of covering up old and perhaps forgotten wounds and hurts. They may be insecure, if not outright afraid. Sometimes they're angry, though they may come across as soft and gentle. Ironically, people who perpetually avoid conflict are usually conflicted. In their attempts to control their relationships and conversations, they kind of end up giving pieces of themselves away, losing their identity and deadening themselves to genuine formation. So our posture towards a non-confrontational person should be compassion. But compassion is rarely passive. Compassion suggests we invite them into a formative relationship where the ideas and desires that perpetuate a non-confrontational nature are slowly but gently challenged and maybe changed. There is a myriad of examples of heart listening. Just listening to someone talk about money for about 5 minutes will usually reveal all sorts of ideas and desires in their hearts. Money is one of the easiest indicators to discern. All right, point number 2. Why is learning to listen to someone's heart often difficult? Well, that's a loaded question. Part of the answer comes from the current Christian dependency on monologue versus dialogue. We're generally trained to receive information through sermons and podcasts, shows, and events, none of which requires us to work through or wrestle with the information being provided. And this has impacted everything from evangelism to how churches are built. My guess is the most impactful evangelists are actually the best heart listeners, not the best talkers. A few years ago, I was walking into a Major League Baseball game, and a group of so-called evangelists were yelling at us as we entered the stadium through bullhorns, telling us that we were all going to hell and quoting their best scriptures to prove it. I was both angry and embarrassed. I can't imagine anyone was converted that day, and I suspect the crowd slid more towards hell than heaven. But my guess is the evangelist went home and checked a box and rested in the assurance that they had appropriately shared the gospel, despite the fact I didn't see a single person engage in any sort of dialogue with the evangelists. No heart listening was going on that day. Many new churches are built to look like and function like auditoriums or concert venues. Musicians and pastors are on the stage. They present information to a separate group, the audience, who receive the information and then leave out the back door. Not a lot of opportunity to practice heart listening in that sort of environment. And there's just the pace of modern life. If our days are constantly filled with activities and work and hobbies and entertainment, and then we crash into bed at night exhausted, heart listening won't come very naturally to us, because it requires an intentionality and an energy and just some time to think. I've been working on this particular habit for years, and I have a long way to go. Well, what's a great way to start? Practice at home. Start listening for heart view indicators from your spouse or your kids or your close friends. See if you can pick up on a need, a hurt, a doubt someone has, and gently ask meaningful, honoring questions that may lead beneath the surface. Practice asking why in some different ways. Many people won't accept our invitation. They won't answer our why questions. They don't want to engage us in a deeper relationship. That's okay. Our role is to be inviting. Third point, and last, what's said first is almost never what's being said. Every husband who has been through premarital counseling is taught this, though I'm not sure how many of us actually remember it. When my wife is upset, what she tells me first is making her upset is not what's making her upset. But years and years of Western education has not really helped our relationship skills. It's based on responding to every asked question with an accurate answer and regurgitating pieces of information. Now, that's informational and it has its place, but it's not relational. Remember, Jesus rarely answered a direct question, though he was uncannily good at listening to everybody's hearts. We're so conditioned to answer asked questions with stock replies. How are you doing? I'm fine. How was your day? Great. We assume the first thing said or the first question asked is actually the real statement or question. Most of the time it isn't. So here's just one last example. I really enjoy the Stump the Expert videos that you can find online. Some super smart apologist or academic type ventures out into the public, maybe to a park or a college campus, and invites students or other people to ask their most challenging questions to try to defeat the arguments of the expert. Now, if our views match those of the apologist, we quietly celebrate when he or she owns or destroys the arguments of the opponent. These types of videos are fun to watch, and I typically learn something by listening to the banter between the questioner and the expert. When I watch Christian apologetics videos, though, I often get a little sad, because the question the person asks is not the question being asked. I recently watched a video in which a young woman asked the apologist if she was going to hell because she didn't believe in Jesus. She asked it with some measure of sarcasm. It was evident she was trying to goad the apologist. It led to a healthy debate on the existence of hell and God's holiness and love and salvation. It was a good, productive discussion. And that's the way most of these videos go. The apologist expertly answers the question that's been asked. I just wonder what would have happened if someone, anyone, had asked the young woman why she was asking about hell. What about her story, about her experience with people, maybe with God, prompted her to ask that question? Some atheists are angry at a God they don't even believe in. What in her story made her angry, or maybe scared? In responding directly to the first statement made or the first question asked, we may be missing an opportunity for heart listening, to invite someone into a deeper truth, into an idea or desire that may need transforming. We always do this from a position of compassion, service, honor. Understanding our interaction may cause a little tension, some conflict, some healthy confrontation. That's okay. That's the way Jesus did it. And in that vein, thanks for listening. The first habit we explored this season is hearing from God. Today we explored hearing the hearts of others, so you might be able to guess the habit we're going to be exploring in the next episode. If you're enjoying this season, give it a great rating on your favorite podcast platform and share the audio and blog with your friends. If you'd like to give financially to Soil and Roots to support our work of cultivating deep discipleship, you can give your tax-deductible gift at any time, safely and securely, at soilandroots.org. And we'll see you next time.